Hello and welcome back to Many. Let's dive right back into Bernardo Kastrup and Alex O'Connor.
as opposed to what behaves. Materialism is a metaphysics. Science is, in principle, metaphysically agnostic. You can do the whole of science without having a single metaphysical conclusion or assumption. You don't need to know what things are, you only need to describe how they behave. In other
Right.
words, science is the activity of predicting what nature would do next. Science cannot, methodologically speaking, um, make any statement about what nature is. It's not equipped to do so as a method. Science
No, that's absolutely correct. Also, according to my understanding of what science does. Basically, let me sort of cut it short. You have this sort of canvas with qualia on it, right? There are color, sounds, smell, touches, and taste on that canvas. And but it's mostly made up of colors and sounds and particular colors, right? And then sort of the mind or whatever you the function of what is going on in there, right? Maps out this canvas with cognitions like elephant and laptop and so on, right? And what science does is trying to what a scientific approach to those cognitions is to look for patterns. Whenever this is the case, this seems to happen, kind of thing, right? That's what goes on that dashboard, to use Bernardo Kastrup's term. How are they placed according to each other, and if it is composed this way, and it will roll that way and fall this way and move that way and so on, right? That's science. There might be an exception, which is human beings. You can if a human being is there, you can make science to predict it will go over there, right? Because it has free will, so to say. That's how we usually frame it, right? But with that exception out of the way, and that's why I address this thing very precisely in my philosophy, links down below, right? Okay, so I agree with this. Science cannot explain anything, but by framing it this way, he sort of alludes to, well, then he must be able to do it. He must be able to explain something. Otherwise, I mean, you wouldn't say, what would an analogy be? I'm trying to come up with a good analogy. Maybe I shouldn't, right? It's it's a sophist kind of trick, and it's sort of a weak sophist. It's sort of people how they talk in their everyday, right? And I add that I've sort of tried to fix the sound problem from the last video, and I think it was a buffer space kind of. I was sort of running out of space on my laptop. I had noticed, and I think it had some issues there, right? Okay, back on track. That you're sort of alluding to. It's sort of preaching. No, it's not practice what you preach. But it's sort of the same thing. If somebody says this thing can't do this, it's a bad philosophy. It can't do this. You're sort of implying whatever you might come up with in this next step actually does that. But that's not given. It's just words throwing up in the air, right? In my opinion, you can't explain anything. And trying to spend your hard-earned life on getting to explanations is just futile. It's a waste of time, right? You can map up what you have, and then you can decide what to do with it using philosophy. That's what you have to work with, right?
science is an observation of the regularities of nature's behavior, the modeling of those regularities, and on the basis of this model, the
What nature's behavior? But what is nature? You mean the dashboard, right? The dashboard's behavior, right? So now we sort of, okay, now this jumps out in some undisclosed metaphysics now. Nature, what is that? You just talked about experiences and dashboard, and that's what the starting point is. Then you can't have a nature that just pops out of nowhere all of a sudden in your philosophy. You have to explain how you get to shit, right? Is that so difficult to understand?
Prediction of what nature would do next. So
No. Nature. But what do you mean nature? Is that which moves on around on your dashboard? Is that nature? Then why don't you call it dashboard? Why do you call it nature? Just because your dashboard behaves a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it predicts what is going on in some fabulated external world. It could be that demon sitting out there manipulating your brain, right? Or your experiences somehow. If there's an external world, it might just be some crazy madman, creating shit in your brain. How would you know? Well, you can't get to it. That's the problem of Descartes' demon, is you can't get to this answer, right? You can't get to a relation between the starting point and what might be before the starting point. It's ridiculous, man, right?
science is perfectly okay to not explain the what and the whys in terms of what things are and why they do what they do. That's not for science. Science is about what will happen next. What are we going to see next? That's what the method is.
Yeah, well, you have to. Well, it's a little simplistic, right? You're looking at what happened before, and you sort of noticed a particular pattern. You're seeing that apple falling from the trees, and you're seeing coconuts, or what your chestnuts and pears and whatever fall from trees and leaves and so on. Why do they do that? Why do they move from there to there? What is it? But there seems to be a pattern, right? They fall in more or less the same speed. They fall in the same direction, which could be said to be sort of the center of the earth or something like that. Why does it fall 45 degrees? Why is it always this way, right? But that's why we can never answer, but we can observe the pattern and say, okay, supplied that this pattern continues in the future, this formula will predict it, right?
Scientific method allows us to do. So it's legitimate that science doesn't say what things are. It doesn't need to. It can't. And it.
No, but it's because most people, if not basically every single person on earth, even some who claim to be, against materialism, like Bernardo Kastrup, has some kind of naive realist notions, like he just had there, talking about nature. What the hell is that? He hasn't explained nature. He just came up with the word, right? It just, nature, there it is. What? That's not how you do philosophy, in my opinion, right? But because most people are naive realists, and if you are also doing you're very scientifically oriented in your sort of everyday and your work or whatever, if you're an academic, right? And your scientific approach, you sort of combine scientific approach and understanding, where you're sort of unearthing patterns that no one has seen before, and it feels like you're discovering nature, right? So materialism is that combination of scientific approach and naive realism, and then you end up with a hard problem, right? At the end of the day,
That's not what its value is all about. Its value is about predicting behavior.
No. Why is it about value? Science doesn't necessarily have value. It's a principle. It's a principle of how to approach, you could say, predicting the future, as you just said, right? It's not about value. It might create some value if you didn't. It might create more value if you use a scientific method rather than looking into tea leaves or something like that, or praying to the sun god for your daily bread, right? It might be a better idea to do science. And in that way, the spin-off is more valuable. But there's nothing inherent valuable as about a scientific method as such. I'm just trying to clarify things here, right?
But materialism is not science. Materialism is a metaphysics, and as such, it is a statement about what things are. If that statement is internally inconsistent, incoherent, has no...
Yeah, but again, I think it's he wants to frame it as if scientists work from a metaphysical idea. I don't think they necessarily think that. They just suffer from naive realism. So what they think they're dealing with is an actual external world because they're used to that understanding. I think it develops very early on, and you would probably suffer, almost like suffering psychologically, if you didn't do that when you grow up, right? And I suppose that's why it's very troublesome, at least for someone like me, to have any sympathy for parents inflicting religion on their children, because it's like it's taking away their ability to be empirical, right? God is everywhere, but can be seen nowhere, right? Blah, man, right?
explanatory power and defies empirical evidence, then it's just bad metaphysics. We should have another one.
Yeah, but he wants to frame all of this. He wants to frame scientific naive realists as having bad metaphysics. Yes, if it's a metaphysics, it's bad, but they don't see a metaphysics. They think they're actually dealing with a direct experience of an actual, not even a direct experience, but an actual world. I know it's confused. That's why at some point you might realize that this naive realism simply doesn't work, because you're both saying that it's an outside world and an inside world at the same time somehow, right? That cannot possibly work.
One.
Well, a few questions come to mind, which I think I know the answer to, but I'd love to hear what you think about this. People will say, okay, yeah, sure, science does make predictions, right? Like one of the great things about science is...
Yeah, I'm a little what pushed back on, but that's not the right term, but it's a little annoying to me when people say science does this and science does that. Science does not do anything, right? It's like saying my TV manual, my laptop manual does this and my laptop manual does that. No, my laptop manual does nothing. There are people doing science. Science is not some, weird thing moving about somewhere in this implied fashion. And I'm sure they wouldn't say that either. But it's like it has become a thing of itself, right? And like society and civilization and academia and all these abstract categories, science has its own existence almost. I'm not saying they're saying that, but it can, as it being repeated and repeated and repeated, it's sort of getting accepted, just like people accept the idea of, society. Nobody has ever explained to me what society is. They can sit in a scientific discussion and all sorts of shit like that, referencing evidence and empirical observations and so on, and then start to talk about society. What the hell is that? It's almost like it's categorized the same way as elephants or mammals, maybe something like that. And then society is out there. What? Where? I can't see any society anywhere, right?
Is that we now know that if we lob an object at a particular velocity, we can predict exactly where it's going to land, and we can send rockets to the moon and stuff. But the reason we can make predictions is because we've come up with theories, right? Like the reason I can predict that a rocket with this much thrust will sort of, reach the planet Jupiter or whatever is because we've developed a theory of, I don't know, rocket propulsion or whatever, and a theory of gravity and a theory of how electricity works that allows us to run the electronics and all this kind of stuff. And those theories, as well as predicting, what's going to happen, they also explain why it's doing it, right? Like the rocket is flying because of gravity and sort of the way that it interacts.
No, but the rocket is flying because of gravity? Are you sure about that, Alex? Isn't there some kind of propulsion and atmosphere and the shit going on? Okay, but you're not explaining anything. You're just being more precise about the story you're telling. When this thing is there and it does this, it moves this way. I can't tell you why, but that's what we have experienced in the past, and that's what it does. You are not explaining anything, to be precise. By being very precise about what objects and entities and kinds of movement and qualia and so on are participating in these scenarios you describe, maybe using some kind of scientific approach, is just very precise. And it might feel like you're explaining something because you might have used a microscope or whatever, that something emerges that you can see bacteria all of a sudden. You couldn't see that before. So it's like you're explaining the illness. It's because of the bacteria, but it's just a bacteria now. It's just a more precise story. You're not explaining anything, in my opinion. You're just being more precise about the causal nature of things, maybe you could say, right?
Interacts with the thrust of the rocket. Gravity pulls it down, the thrust goes upwards, and that's a perfect explanation as to why the rocket is lifting, right?
Oh, science can give you the why.
No, but you don't get a why. But if you have a rocket that does this and it pushes against the atmosphere or whatever, why does it move? It's not because it does it that it moves. There's nothing that says that it has to move. It's just an observation. You've done this observation so many times that it has become its own explanation. But it is a circular argument. You're not explaining anything, dude. Alex, baby. Alex, baby. You're not explaining anything. You're just saying it has done this all the time. I have watched it, and I expect it to do it in the future. So I'm going to follow this principle or this formula or whatever. You are not explaining anything.
Of behavior, in the sense of elaborating on the causal chains that have led to certain behaviors and even predicting future behaviors. But when we think that science is making metaphysical statements, for instance, the world is made of atoms, and atoms.
Now it's the world. How many terms have he used? He has used nature and world and dashboard and experience, and I mean, he's already confused it, right? I don't understand why he's not more coherent in his choice of terms. It's lazy, and the red flags are up for me, right? Use coherent terms. Start by using a term and then stick to this term all through your philosophy to not confuse what you're talking about. I'm not sure if you're talking about your dashboard or a fabled external world or what, right? He might be framing somebody else's statement, but I haven't heard this statement or this particular person he's referring to, right? So it's a very fluffy debate, this, to be frank, right?
Have neutrons and protons in the nucleus and electrons in the orbitals. We tend to think that it is intrinsic to the scientific method to discover what things actually are. But it is not. The entire history of science is the history of the betterment of our convenient fictions.
Yeah. There is some psychological aspects. This is my commentary. I'm not responding directly to something he just said, right? But this is I don't think that the way, let's say, my mind works is geared towards accepting that there's some aspect I can't get to, right? And this is also why people end up with naive realism, because it maps everything out and there's nothing left to deal with, right? So if you are retracting into you retract away from an external world because you understand the inherent paradox built into it, you're sort of becoming at least momentarily a solipsist before then you have to argue why that is an external world, right? But I think that Bernardo Kastrup's problem is he keeps that external world as if it's still there, even though he's just saying, okay, I have my experiences, but there's still something out there. He hasn't realized that you actually need to argue for that external world. And I think it's the psychology of the mind being very, there are probably levels of functions within my mind, brain. I don't know what term to use. I don't like to use those terms, but I'm lacking a good term, right? The back end, the front end and the back end of my mind. The back end, there might be a lot of shit going on, sort of a lizard brain and whatever, that sort of wants to control what is going on in that back end, right? And you have sort of the direct access to the front end, right? All these sort of psychology and shadow and Jungian shadow and whatever is sort of sometimes popping up down from the back end of your mind, right? Okay, but I think there's a tendency for the mind to quick fix a problem. If you suddenly realize there is a paradox built into naive realism, then you retract into your experiences. Then you immediately keep that external world because you're used to it. Your first encouragement is not to say, well, now I have to argue for it. No, you keep it. And I think that's the problem Bernardo Kastrup is fighting. He has kept this external world as if it's given to him, though he appeals to the necessity for an argument. And that's why I don't quite understand why he, as I pointed out in a prior part in this series, that he can just come up with sort of some stupid, you experience the same thing, therefore there's an external world. It's a really, really stupid argument, right? You have to do better than that. But I think there's an inherent problem in philosophizing in that it almost like it feels like you're not completely in control of your own thinking, right? That there's maybe some ego aspect, you could say, of your mind that sort of goes in and overrules your sort of free thinking. But when you sit down and sort of retrace your path, you would have to accept that now you need to establish that external world if you want that to keep it. And if you're in doubt of how that could be done, check my philosophy down below. I explain it perfectly simple how my approach is to that.
Science does not need to pin down what things are. It only needs to come up with a convenient fiction that is such that the world behaves as though that
convenience fiction is sort of a kind of derogative, right? It's just convenient fiction. It's just made up shit that it just fits the bill, right? It's like no. It's it might be in some cases, but you're actually following some kind of principle based on direct observation. Be that an external or an internal world, depending on your metaphysics, right? But it's still dealing with direct experience, and that's some very troubling aspect of Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy that we're probably going to get to later in this interview, right? And I'll point it out then that he violates this idea of evidence, using evidence to support ideas of an external world. It's the most fucking stupid argument you can do, right?
Convenient fiction were true. It gives us a sort of a handle on how to think about things, but those convenient fictions do not need to be true. Even if they are false, they still have great value. I'll give you two historical examples. You're talking about
No. A theory can't be true or false. I mean, that's again these cornerstone words, right? He's just throwing true and false left and right. A theory is an attempt at making a coherent description of a particular pattern among your cognitions, you could say. But it might not be completely perfect, right? And that's why you have to observe shit. Okay, they say that this is going to happen. Now I'm going to do that experiment, so to say, and look and see, does it happen that way as this guy predicted? Well, there is a problem when we go very, very, very fast, for instance, right? Then it doesn't hold anymore. But when we stand still, or more or less stand still, it's so minute discrepancy that it doesn't matter, right? It has no bearing on the result of the experiment as such, right?
Newton. So Newton's convenient fiction was that there was this invisible force that acted at a distance without contact.
But are there visible forces? He says invisible force. What's the difference between a force and an invisible force? What does he mean? Are all forces not invisible? Okay, show me, point out some visible force somewhere. Point out the visible force. So why do you need to say it's an invisible force? I don't understand it.
And instantaneously pulling celestial bodies to one another. The French couldn't take this seriously for 50 years. They thought it was some magical woo-woo.
No, but yeah, I think that when you're doing this kind of science, it's the structure of mathematics and using that as the language for coming up with a coherent description of this. So the pattern itself is sort of embedded in that mathematical description, but that ends up creating a new entity that says what I'm trying to describe equals this, and then you're bringing in the what I'm trying to describe, and then you call it gravity, and it seems like you have invented some new kind of existence. No, it's basically just saying all of this goes on here, and I'm giving the name, I'm giving it the name gravity.
Instantaneous acting forces at a distance without contact. What the hell was that? So the force of gravity was a convenient fiction. Whether it was true or not doesn't matter. We put a man on the moon using.
What do you mean it's true? What? How is it true? What? Can you give me a definition of truth and false for that matter? If I say, is somebody asks me, is this a glass? And I say yes, or I say true, right? It's an object I'm dealing with. But if I say F equals m times a, force equals mass times acceleration, is that true or false? That's a different kind of category than my water glass here, right? So can you just throw around these terms true and false as you see fit, or what? And that's why I'm saying I would like actually a coherent definition of what you mean by true and false, Mr. Bernardo Kastrup, right?
That convenient fiction. It's a way to think about what's going on. We imagine that there is this magical force that acts at a distance.
No, but it's just just because you use a term for the mathematical description of what is going on, the relationship and so on, right? Doesn't mean that it's just it has an existence. Just because you call this formula is gravity doesn't mean that gravity all of a sudden has an existence. I think that's a misunderstanding of scientific approach and mathematical notation and so on.
Needless to say, Einstein came around with general relativity.
I actually think he's kind of in strawman territory a lot of times when he describes materialism. It's not you know, it's a subtle kind of way, right? It's not, you know, sort of, I'm missing a term here. It's not damn obvious that there's strawman involved, but it's sort of, he twists a bit the understanding and give you try to instill the understanding in you, the listener, that there are huge problems with materialism and so on. Yeah, sure. But he wants it to be, okay, convince you that you should find something else. And then he said, well, I have something over here, you know, right?
And today we go like, there is no such a force. What passes for gravity is just a curvature of space-time. Matter deforms space-time, shifts the axis of time.
No, but that's the current convenient fiction until something else pops up, and so on, and so on, and so on, right?
Towards the center of something, and that becomes your future. That's why you fall, because your future points to the center of the earth. That's why you fall. Oh, that's a new convenient fiction. The space-time is a fabric that bends and twists that you can actually deform. And then comes around loop quantum gravity. Oh, there isn't even time. Gravity is just sort of an emergent thing out of microscopic abstract quantum patterns and processes going on. So our convenient fictions change all the time. That's perfectly all right. The world behaves as though...
Yeah, but it's like, it's the undogmatic nature of a scientific approach is when you observe something that doesn't cohere to what it's supposed to do according to the prior description or prior scientific description of what is supposed to happen, then there's a problem, right? You might want to take another look and say, does it fall in a 45 degrees? Yes, it falls in 45 degrees, not directly perpendicular to Earth. Okay, so there's some problem with gravity here, right? The gravity formula or the gravity science as it has been until now. So it's when observations contradict in some fashion what has been prior stated should be the case. Then you sort of reformulate. If you take gravity, then Einstein comes up with a new formula for gravity, right? And in the future, somebody else might find some flaws in his, or some. It's not completely incorrect, but it's more correct. There are no holes in the description and so on, right? That's the undogmatic approach of science, or having a scientific approach. It's vastly different from religion, right?
Oh, convenient fiction A were true until we measure better and we look closer. Oh, convenient fiction A is now not good enough. We come up with convenient fiction B. And then we evolve, we measure more precision, more measurements, more observations. Oh, B is also not good enough. Convenient fiction C. You can do the entirety of science with convenient fictions. Atoms are convenient.
No, but I don't like this term convenient fiction, right? It is a derogative, right? Convenient fiction, it's just like it's not perfect in one go, right? It's a convenient, yeah, it's not an incorrect statement, but it has sort of connotations, right?
Convenient fictions. We reduce atoms to so-called subatomic particles, and those subatomic particles are reduced to the excitations of quantum fields. And we imagine that there are 17 of them plus gravity. What is a quantum field? Nobody can tell you what it is because it's defined in terms of how it behaves. In other words, it's a convenient fiction. It helps us to imagine the universe as a stack of...
Yeah, but if you want to call gravity a convenient fiction, then the fictive part of it is the term gravity. Gravity is just a term used on this, like groceries, right? It's not like you go into buy some shit and you have a bag of groceries, and you have both, bread and pasta and tomatoes and groceries, right? You could make it groceries equals bag of shit, right? But you didn't buy bag of shit and groceries. You buy that bag of shit, that's it. Groceries is just a term you use to describing what it is. Like gravity equals this. Groceries equals this, right?
17 spatially unbound quantum fields, some of which interact with others, some of which
17? Oh my God. Defund this shit, right? People worldwide living basically in poverty, except for a very few people who live in a high-flying life as millionaires, right? And they spend people's money on figuring out there's 17 fields that are convenient fictions. Oh, it freaks me out, man, right?
hardly interact with anything else. It helps us think of things this way. It doesn't mean that there is a thing out there called a quantum field. No, the world behaves as though there were 17
No, it doesn't, yeah. No, don't put the cart before the horse here, right? You have made an observation, and then you have created a theory that encompasses the idea of fields to explain, you could say, but you need to have the observation before you could create the fields, right? It's not saying, now I'm experiencing fields. No. You just said they're convenient fictions, and these fictions have to be created after the observation. And that's one of the problems for using this field analogy for describing an external world. Fields are convenient fictions, and fictions are created by human beings. It's all internal. It's all a phenomena, right? It's an abstraction in my context of my philosophy, linked down below, right?
quantum fields. Eventually, we will succeed in some grand unification theory, and there will be one quantum field. And even gravity will be folded into that with some arcane mathematics and acrobatics. We will get to that. And even then, that will just be the new convenient fiction. So science is not in the business of telling us what the world is.
No, but neither are philosophers. Because you can't. Thinking that you have some magical ability to pop out of your own mind and think about what is beyond your experiences is fucking delusional, right? Which is what you're implying here. Yeah, all this science, yeah, it's convenient fictions. But let me tell you about my fancy metaphysics, right? I can go there.
This is quite a fundamental misunderstanding of what the scientific method is all about. Science is in the business of telling us what we will see next. And in the process of doing that, it helps to come up with a convenient fiction in terms of which we can think of a model that accounts for what we will see next.
Okay, so fields are models, and models are created by human beings. They are kind of abstractions based on these observations from his dashboard. Okay, so these fields are something that goes on in somebody's mind. It's not an external world. Keep that in mind, right? He just said it.
Next.
Mm-hmm. I mean, people will want to say, okay, I get what you're saying. Like, science realistically only tells you what things do, and fundamentally, yeah, if you ask me to describe what a quantum field is or what an electron is or something, I'll sort of tell you what it does. But like, that's all there is, because, you know, I look at a mic.
No. It's not necessarily all there is. No. If a scientist says that, there's something wrong with that scientist, right? But it's trying to extend science to do everything. No. It can't create a formula for when you're going to be hungry, right? It just doesn't work that way, because it's not a part of your phenomena. It's not a part of your dashboard, to use Bernardo Kastrup's term, right? So science deals with what can be experienced through qualia and how it behaves and so on, right? That's what it does. Everything else has no, don't use science there. And that's why I say you can't use science to do metaphysics. It should be obvious, right? But that's exactly what Mr. Bernardo Kastrup is going to do later, right? Okay, we are at the 40 minutes. I can keep going a bit more, I think. Let's see.
Microscope, and I can observe an atom. I can look around me and I can observe a physical world. People sort of imagine that
you can observe a physical world. What world? What do you mean you can observe it? If you experience an external world, it's not external, because an experience, then it must be internal, right? Otherwise you couldn't experience it. But if you're not experiencing it, what are you talking about? What are you referring to? I mean, it's like you're referring to an experience and then you're saying it's outside. But if the experience itself is not outside, then there's something else outside beyond your experiences. But my question is then, why do you think there's something outside your experiences? Give me the argument, please. And it, of course, has to be settled through your ontology, which is based on your experiences, obviously, right? Because that was your basic starting point, as Bernardo Kastrup says, right? You're sort of caught in this. You're biting your own tail now. You can't get out of this circle, right?
we're these sort of conscious agents who sit inside of our own heads, and we've got these little like windows, you know, our eyes and our ears and little sort of sense perception all over our skin, and what we're essentially doing is just sort of like letting in information, right? And
okay, so if you need to have an experience in order to understand, you have eyes, right? Then if the eyes are responsible for your experience, then you must have that experience before you know about eyes. But then eyes, what you call eyes, cannot be that which is responsible for the experience, because you needed the experience in order to talk about eyes. Don't you see a problem? Can't you see the circularity of it? Or the paradoxical nature of it?
because, you know, if the
Alex O'Connor is obviously a naive realist.
world is mental, you know, I can't control the world around me like I can control my own thoughts. I can, you know, think happy things and sad things, but the world outside of me, it impresses itself upon me, right?
Impresses? What do you mean impresses? What the world outside what? Outside your experiences or what? You have to be precise when you talk about these things. This is a very, very, very important step in your philosophy, right? And please refer to my philosophy if you want to see how I do it, which I believe is the only rigid way of dealing with an external world, in my opinion, right? And if you have a different and better way, please tell me about it, right? But these guys are just throwing shit up in the air and pretend to be philosophers, right? They are not dealing with these core questions here.
And when it does, it feels like I'm sort of, you know, accepting some input data. So
it feels like you're accepting, but a feeling is not that which it is. What do you mean it feels like? It's not an argument, dude. It feels like. What feels like? Is it a color? Is it a sound? Is it a touch? Is it a taste? Is it a smell? What is it? What is it, that feeling you're talking about, that makes you say that it's an external world? And argue rigidly. Use some kind of argumentation from these experiences, right? You have to argue from these phenomena of, let's say, internal phenomena, however you want to phrase it, that makes you say there must be an external world. Look at this argument. It's perfect, right? Give it to me.
aren't we just kind of, you know, astronauts of the material world, just sort of flying through and having access to the things around us, like accurately represented to our minds?
Well, clearly the world impinges itself on us, right? That's why that's the experience.
There it is. Clearly it impinges. What does that mean, clearly? What do you mean clearly? Well, clearly my philosophy is correct. So done, right? I mean, so you don't need to go any further. Just go in my link to my philosophy down below. Yeah, clearly it's correct. So that's it, right?
Experience we call life and being in the world. But the idea that what is out there consists only of how it appears to us can be immediately contradicted by an element of
basically, maybe I don't want to stop here, but if they don't address the question of how you establish an external world, then my interest basically stops there. You have to deal with the external world, not least because I will consider you having an idea about what I am and how I should be treated and so on, because you have this external world approach, right? And if you have some kind of idea of what goes on out there, you might also have an idea about how it should be treated at the end. Some way down the road that might not even be disclosed by the thinker presenting it, right? So this somewhat objective understanding of an external world is highly problematic, right? And I would go so far as saying that how you deal with this idea of an external world is the most important question you can answer in your philosophy, because it has huge ramifications for the rest of your philosophy. If you don't deal with this question correctly, you're fucked, right? So that's why I'm so adamant about people talking about this shit, because they don't seem to be understanding the significance of what they're doing. And this lazy approach, like saying, obviously, right? Clearly, it's the case, the X, right?
the world that we are very acquainted with, and that's ourselves. Imagine
The world we are acquainted with, so there's also ourselves. Is that my phenomena, my qualia, and so on? So that's also a world. So there's a world inside and a world outside. It's all a world. All these terms just melt together now, right? It's like he's just sitting there in his attic spewing words. It's completely incoherent. To me, he might as well have sitting there saying something like actually it would be better if he did that. He wouldn't be as dangerous, right?
imagine if an alien came here and looked at you, dressed in your black t-shirt with this microphone in front of you, nodding as you're nodding right now, or gesticulating with your hands, and the alien would say, "That's all there is to Alex. Alex is just the set of images that I perceive. There is nothing more to the
Do you perceive No, the images is the perception. You don't perceive images. I know I'm fly-forking the terms here, but I feel I have to, because the more fluffy, the more casual they are in their definition of terms or lack of definition of terms and so on, the more precise I have to be in scrutinizing the terms used.
reality of Alex than how Alex appears to me. The gesticulation, the nodding, and the movements and the words that come out of Alex's mouth, and so on and so forth. Well, you would know that if you know anything ever, you would know this, that the alien's assertion is untrue, because behind, underlying, and somehow immanent in what the alien sees, there is the inner life of Alex, which is the real Alex. It's the numinal Alex as opposed to the phenomenal Alex. It's the thing in itself as opposed to how it appears to external observation. And that is very, very, very important for Alex. That Alex is not just a set of external appearances, that there is an inner life, there is an inner reality, a numinal reality to Alex. Now, take the next step. What is the appearance of Alex? You know Alex has a numinal reality, but clearly Alex also has a phenomenal reality. You look in the mirror.
Clearly? Why is that clearly? How do you get to that? I mean, this is ridiculous. Clearly? He's just circumvented the problem of other minds now. Clearly, he has some phenomena. How does he do this? This is ridiculous, man. This guy is a charlatan, right? What the hell are you doing, Bernardo Kastrup? It's fucking ridiculous.
And you see it. What is that reality? Well, it's made of the same kinds of atoms and fields that constitute the rest of the universe. So at least in...
Yeah, but that's a bit of a stretch, right? Just because you observe some shit in your vicinity and say that's probably atoms because some weird scientists said so, right? They have some models and it's a convenient fiction. So therefore, this convenient fiction goes for all of the universe. But all of that universe he's talking about is actually an external world. It must be. Right? So it's this confusion of what he's talking about in the moment. He's just blurring the lines. And maybe that's a part of the trick. It's blurring the lines so you sort of give up having lines. So you're both inside and outside and, at the same time and whatever, right? He's basically become a new kind of idealist, naive realist. Maybe you could say a naive idealist, right?
In Alex's case, atoms and fields, all the physical stuff, is what Alex's numinal world, Alex's inner life, looks like when Alex is observed from the outside. At least in that one case, matter is the extrinsic appearance of inner mentation, inner mental state.
No, matter doesn't appear. I can't believe this, man, right? You just said matter is a convenient, or maybe you didn't say that, but matter is one of these convenient fictions, right? You don't experience matter. You have come up with the idea of matter because of particular behaviors of your experiences, but you're not experiencing that description called matter, that model or whatever. You're not experiencing matter. You experience cars and glasses of water and iPhones that has particular qualia. That's what you're experiencing. At least that's what I'm experiencing, right? I should say, right? So, and my axiom is that because I experience this, everybody else experiences it the same way. That's an axiom I'm working from in my philosophy, obviously, right? But how can one of these convenient fictions all of a sudden become an experience? He's confused. He's completely confused, right? He's completely lost his marbles.
States. That's why there is this correlation between inner experience and brain states, right? And one is the appearance of the other. Of course, they correlate.
Of course. There's again this obviously and of course and so on. What is that kind? What kind of argument is that? Of course. Oh my God! Because he says so, right, Mr. PhD.
So unless you're prepared to postulate some gratuitous, completely arbitrary discontinuity in nature, we have then to at least be open to the possibility that not only in Alex's case, but in the rest of all other cases in this universe, matter too is the extrinsic appearance of some form of qualitative inner reality. That is the only reasonable null.
No, but you don't experience matter. You don't. Matter is an idea, right? You can take some person who has lived on a deserted island for 20 years and show them an elephant or put them an elephant and they will say elephant, right? They won't say matter. I'm experiencing, yeah, there's an elephant. But what is this matter? Have you heard of matter? Matter? What is matter? Yeah, but it's what it's made of. How did you get to that? Well, because it's a convenient fiction. Ah, it's a convenient fiction, so it's not a direct experience, right?
Well, hypothesis here. In other words, you need argument to defend some other hypothesis, because the face value situation is that my body is made of the same atoms and force fields as the rest of the universe. Clearly, my body is how my mental inner life appears to outside of observation. So the same should hold to the rest about the rest of the universe. That doesn't mean that I'm saying everything is conscious. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that all matter is the extrinsic appearance of inner mental states.
Okay.
So when I have a thought, my body looks a particular way. When I'm thinking about pizza, he can see that on my face or my shoulder somewhere. Something. That's what it sounds like to me, right? It's kind of stupid, and it's making an obvious circle, in my opinion. He says what it looks like is what I have always experienced it to look like, and that's why it looks like that. That's what I'm hearing, right? It's an obviously stupid circular kind of reasoning. It looks like that because that's what it looks like.
So we'll slow down a little bit here, and we'll try and sort of pull this apart just to make sure everybody's following along.
Okay, so maybe this is a good place to stop right before we reach the 1 hour mark. Okay, please share, like, and subscribe. Let me have your comment. What do you think about this this awful philosopher Bernardo Kastrup? I'm not, trying to bash Alex O'Connor necessarily. It's more the problem with Bernardo Kastrup, who pushes all these weird, dysfunctional attempts at doing philosophy, right? That is a detriment to getting somewhere functional in your thinking, in my opinion, unless you want to stay in some kind of woo-woo land, right? Okay. So with that said, have a nice day. See you in the next video.